Broadcasting from the Business Radio X studio in Alpharetta, it's time for Profit Sense with Bill McDermott.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Profit Sense. This podcast dives into the stories behind some of Atlanta's successful businesses and business owners and the professionals that advise them. We help the local business leaders get the word out about the important work they're doing to serve their market, their community, and their profession, as well as discuss current issues that business owners are facing today across a wide variety of industries. I'm your host, Bill McDermott, and this show is presented by the Profitability Coach. When business owners want to increase their profitability, they often don't have the expertise to know where to start or what to do. We leverage our knowledge and relationships from 32 years in banking to identify the hurdles getting in the way and create a plan to deliver profitability they never thought possible. We have three great guests on the show today. Bob King with First Horizon Bank. Bob, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for letting me be here.
Erik Christensen with Bulldog Movers. Erik, so glad you're here.
Thank you, Bill. Good to be here.
And Danny Vander Maten. Danny, so glad you're here from Cresa and looking forward to chatting with you.
Bill, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited today.
Bob, I'm going to start with you. Many business owners don't know how banking works. Some think banks are venture capitalists. Some think banks loan money to people that don't need it. Could you share with our audience how banking works, especially borrowing money?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Bill. So I think a lot of business owners actually do understand that, and then some do not. The ones that do, I think, have been in business longer. They've needed to access capital to grow their businesses, and so they understand what banks need. They know themselves why they need to borrow the funds, and those are obviously easy people to work with. They've been through the process before. Typically, they've been in business a long time. I think also what you're speaking to when you think about the venture capitalist or banks lending money to folks that don't need it is typically someone that hasn't borrowed money before. Now, they may have been in business a long time, but they just haven't needed capital. Either they've chosen not to leverage their business or take out debt, or they just haven't needed it. Maybe their cash flow has supported their business. But for those people, sometimes they get frustrated by bankers and all the information we tend to ask. They just want a loan. And typically this is what I need the loan for, or they may not even know what they need the loan for, but sometimes they don't understand the process. And sometimes they don't understand when you share with them, I'm able to help you out, but not entirely. And I think what I would share to those people is that, and try to have them understand, is that there's really three different buckets that you can go to access capital, in my opinion. And one of them is bank debt. And historically and traditionally, that's the cheapest form of capital. Then the next area is mezzanine debt, or it would be something like ABL lending or factoring or a finance company. And that type of debt is a little bit more expensive. Mm-hmm. And then the third bucket, if you will, is going to be equity. And that traditionally is the most expensive form of capital to raise when you need additional funds to grow your business. And so I think if you just understand that, and based on your needs, and have a banker explain to you whether you're position for senior debt, whether you need to get a different type of lender based on your borrowing need, or whether there's truly equity, there's an equity need involved. And then understand that. And then what I try to do is explain to them why I'm able to help them, why I'm not able to help them, and then introduce them to somebody that can help them and understand why that may be the best option. The last thing that I would share is sometimes they don't think you're giving them the full story. And so what I do there is I say, please take everything that you've given to me and go visit with a couple other banks and see if you get the same answer. And if you do, then come back and let's visit. Let's try to help point you in the right direction.
Yeah, that really is helpful in understanding the different types of debt and equity that a business owner can access. We're talking today with Bob King with First Horizon Bank. Bob's a commercial banker with 35 years of experience working with C-level executives, is closely held in public companies. Bob specializes in delivering strategic advice and financial tools to help business owners achieve financial success and long-term security. Bob, I want to take the conversation now to differences and similarities that a business owner should know between large banks and small to medium-sized banks. So let me put it in the form of a question. You've worked with both. You've worked with large banks and some small and medium-sized banks. What are some of the differences and similarities a business owner should know?
Yeah, you shared these questions with me in advance, and this one, quite honestly, I spent the most amount of time on because I have been in the industry a long time, and as you said, I've worked for large and small and medium-sized firms. And I guess the best way I could answer the question, and in a way that people could relate to it without getting into granular details, would be that we're all aware that the term or the acronym CEO stands for Chief Executive Officer. So we've all heard that, right? And so it could also stand for, and for business owners, and we have one here today that we're going to hear from in a moment, it could stand for customers, employees, and owners, right? And so for firms as well, and we talked about this a little bit leading up to beginning our program today, there's also the community and being present and supporting the communities in which we live, work, and play. And so in my experience, if you're a large institution, I think what happens, and you almost have to do this, is you become very shareholder driven. And you have to think about the order of what I just shared with you: customers, employees, community, and business owners, shareholders. And what order those flow in for larger banks ebbs and flows depending upon their objectives. And oftentimes shareholder value is number one.
Sure.
And then clients and employees and community fall, and they shuffle back and forth between the other three. And I think when you are a mid-tier or a smaller bank, you recognize that, boy, you better take care of your clients because you're still trying to build them and you don't have as many clients and you don't have 40, 50-year-old or 100-year-old clients. We've been around for a long time, so we do have that. But you better take care of your clients, number one. And then number two, you better take care of the people that take care of your clients, and that's the employees. And then number three, be present in the community. Take care of your community. It's where you live, work, and play. So be a good corporate citizen in the way of community sponsorship. And then the shareholders will be taken care of. If you do those things in the right order, your shareholders will be taken care of. And I would say at First Horizon Bank, quite honestly, we do that very well. And having worked at other places, it makes it a fun place to work. When it's shareholder driven only, it's a little bit of a different environment. I would share that with you. The other thing I would share about size, I think, and it was discussed earlier before we got started here, is you're just more nimble. The smaller the bank, the more nimble you could be. And the best example I could give, I had another one, but the one I'm going to share is that coming on your show today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here, at a large institution, it might have taken me 2 or 3 weeks to vet this process to come here and chat with you all today.
Sure.
And it was done in 24 hours. And Lori Chase is the woman's name that helped me out, and she's our local public relations director. And she was very engaged in the process. And then she even called me last night to apologize that it took so long. And so I think if you're dealing with a smaller local bank, regional bank, they can just be more nimble. You've got local decision makers from a credit standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, and they're accessible to our clients. And I just think that creates a different experience.
Yeah, what a great way to answer that question. And Lori, if you're listening, thank you for allowing us to have Bob on the show. When you mentioned First Horizon, our listeners couldn't see the smile on your face that you were sharing at that moment. Talk a little bit about why your clients enjoy banking, not only with you, but with First Horizon.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think I covered a good bit of this already, but I'll just expand on saying and repeating again, we're just a really flat organization. You are a lot of the things we're talking about today and a lot of typical commercial clients look for in a bank is credit. And there are many other things we do, but when they need to borrow money, they want to make sure they can borrow money. And so when you're a flat organization and you have local credit decision makers that can actually come out and visit with you, you can actually meet these people. It's not somebody where you send it to a center down in another state and it's decisioned. You're wanting to borrow money. You're wanting to borrow capital. You've spent a lot of time thinking about that. You want to get a yes answer. You want it to be structured properly. And so we're a flat organization where you can bring the local business leaders out. I'm certainly accessible, our local credit partners, and you can meet these people and have a relationship with them. And when the good times, it's good to know those people, but people stub their toes from time to time, or they have a big ask. They're making an acquisition. There's some business ownership change, and you need something a little more special, and you need them to stretch. Having that personal relationship makes a difference. So I would say that's probably where we really play very well. And then I think me personally, What I hope my clients say about me is that I truly care about them and their business. I think about this a lot. I've been doing this a long time. I've learned a lot from the organizations that I've worked for. I've learned a lot more from the clients that I've been able to serve. And they teach you a great deal about their challenges, their opportunities, their struggles, and they challenge you to help their needs. They don't always look to their banker to be an advisor, but if you've been doing it long enough and you've taken the time to listen to your clients and they've taken the time to teach you, then you ought to share that with others. And that's what I try to do.
Yeah. I've heard it said, people don't care how much until they know how much you care.
That's right.
We're talking today with Bob King with First Horizon Bank. First Horizon is a leading regional financial services company dedicated to helping their clients, communities, and associates unlock their full potential with capital and counsel. Bob, I want to take the conversation towards business owners. For a business owner who's thinking about borrowing money, what makes the business bankable?
So, you know this already, Bill, because you were a banker for a long time. But it really comes down to something that we learned early in our careers back when they used to train bankers. You and I both went through a training program.
We did.
Some banks still have those training programs. I was blessed to go through one. And I was fortunate to be able to write an article a couple of years ago for the Georgia Society of CPAs. I sent it to you. I'd be happy to repost it again on LinkedIn. But it's not a simple process when you're trying to secure debt and a loan. There's a lot of questions asked and there's a lot of information that needs to be provided. But this article that I wrote is entitled How a Banker Thinks. And it really goes into a great detail about how bankers make decisions, what information they're looking for, do's and don'ts about interacting with your banker. But relative to the credit piece itself, and as we're taught early, the 5 C's of credit.
Sure.
And it's how bankers make decisions, and it's how they've been making decisions for a long time. And the first one is character. You just want to do business with good people that do what they say they're going to do. And think about today. Think about all the technology and social media. And when somebody doesn't behave properly, nobody really wants to be a part of that. So character has always been important, but it's even become more important. So that's really number one in the order, in my opinion. And then cash flow. If you take out a loan, the bank wants it to be repaid. So you got to generate profits and cash flow to repay the loan. The third one is collateral. Banks like a secondary source of repayment if something happens to the primary source. I always remind people that they think the bank's lending them the money. It's really our client's money. That's the bank's model. Clearly a bank has net worth and equity that they built up over time too, capital, their own capital. But for the most part, you're lending your client's money, so it needs to be repaid. So you have a primary and secondary source of repayment. The third one is capital. You like to see somebody have some skin in the game. If you go to finance your house, a bank says, what's your down payment going to be, right? So that's the capital. You'd like to see a business owner put some of their own capital in there. And then the third one is really conditions. It's a catch-all category. And that's business acumen, the industry that somebody's in, supply chain issues, things of that nature. That's really the one that goes pretty deep, and there's a lot of due diligence that goes into that last one, conditions, and it also creates a lot of questions that we ask of our clients. And so those are the 5 C's of credit. And I would just say that the biggest thing about lending money to people is them recognizing that we're going to ask them a lot of questions. We're going to try to understand their business at a very high level, hopefully, again, so that we can be advisory. But we also have to recognize that you're making a loan, as I said earlier, that eventually has to be repaid. And we want the business to be successful. We want to lend them money that we feel they can repay. And then we want to have a relationship with them as that process it plays out.
Absolutely. What a great answer. Thanks for sharing. And a lot of wisdom, folks, packed into this conversation. Bob, last question. If you could share some of that wisdom about banking with the business owner community and our listening audience, what would it be?
I'd be happy to. And so the first one, and these are just some quick points, but the first one, I think, if you want to remember any of them, there's 4 of them, but the first one, in my opinion, is what I call, and it's in the article that I wrote, but it's called the 3 legs of the stool. And post '08, which you and I lived through, and John over here as well, and we lived through an interesting time, but what they called the Great Recession. And I think I already was aware of this because I'd been a banker long enough, but it really magnified the importance of what I call the three legs of the stool. And that's to keep the proper balance between cash flow, liquidity, and leverage. And so if you think about that in terms of an individual and you're employed at a company, you get paid because you work, and that's your salary. And then liquidity is your savings. And then leverage is, do I have equity built up in my business, or do I have it built up in the profit or the equipment that I use? And so what I've learned and what I specifically saw happen in a good way, and for some clients were hurt by this because they didn't maintain this proper balance. But over time, as you hit some speed bumps, one or more of these can be challenged. If cash flow is affected, then you better have some savings. You better have some liquidity to cover you until it comes back, until you can adjust to that. If cash flow and liquidity are affected, then you better have some net worth built up in some assets so that you can leverage that in order to raise some capital. If all three of those are not positioned properly and you hit a speed bump, it's a bad outcome. And so for long-term growth and success, just maintain and think about surrounding yourself with people that help you do this and be focused on it yourself, that maintain a positive cash flow position or focus on it, liquidity and leverage. And then the other ones are just quick and about dealing with your banker and interacting with your banker. When you need capital, try to understand what you need and why you need it. You may not. If it's for a building, that's easy, right? I know I'm buying a building or I'm buying equipment. But oftentimes it has to do with components and what's going on your balance sheet and balance sheet items. And that's where somebody like you, or that's somebody like a CPA or your banker, if they're smart, can help you. But try to figure that out. But if you don't understand what you need the money for, sit down with somebody like I shared and figure out why you really need this money. Because sometimes it may be you need to cut your cost. You're borrowing money to fund losses, and that's not a good use of funds.
Sure.
And so take some time to figure that out, because the need should mirror how you repay that. And again, if you know why you need the money, you're going to match up the terms and the structure to repay that based on the need. So try to understand that. If you don't, surround yourself with somebody that can help you understand that. The next one would be take time to get to know. Your banker should be taking time to get to know you. I certainly do. But supply the information that they ask. I was told one time by a client, it's so true, that a banker sure can ask a lot of questions, and it's impossible to give them too much information. But just be patient with us in that regard. Answer the questions. We're trying to help you. We're trying to be advisory. We're trying to give you that yes answer, so just try to respect that. And then lastly, I would just suggest terms and structure are absolutely important. Don't get me wrong, pricing is very important. It's been since the beginning of time. But I would also suggest that you choose your bank and your banker based on building a relationship with them. That it's a culture that fits for you, it's a size bank that works for you, and it's where you can feel like you have a long-term relationship, because any business owner, and we're getting ready to hear from one in here in a moment, it's not easy to change banks. And so pick a bank that works for you short and long term, and just don't base your decision on pricing and structure. So those are my thoughts for the day.
Yeah, great words. And Bob, if someone wanted to get in touch with you either by phone or email, what's the best way for them to do that?
My email address is rking@firsthorizon.com. And the best way to reach me, I know I have an 818 area code, but I lived in California and it was an interesting place to live for a while. And I just liked it. But I love being back home in Georgia. But pardon the 818 area code, but 818-309-8838 is my cell phone number. And I love talking to business owners, and I love what I do. And if you're ever challenged in any way with any bank or needing to borrow capital, or you just want to sit down and talk about your business, I'd be happy to sit down and talk with you.
Yeah. Bob, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're now going to move on to Erik Christensen. Erik is CEO of Bulldog Movers and a good friend of mine for almost 17, 18 years. Erik, to kick us off, part of your career started in accounting and finance. How do you feel that prepared you to become CEO of a very successful company, Bulldog Movers, over the past 21 years?
Thanks, Bill. And first, thank you for inviting me today. And Bill and I have been close for a long time here, so really appreciate being on your show. But being in accounting, and not really finance, but more accounting, I'm an auditor. I started out my career at Arthur Andersen, and I worked there for 8 years, almost 9 years left. And I was at Deloitte for another 5 years doing consulting, more financial systems work. But I think it's hugely important because you get to see a lot of different businesses and you see how people make money. And there's lots of different ways to make money out there. If you're a young person, you're thinking about becoming an accountant, I would highly encourage you to do that. There's a shortage of accountants these days, according to Boyd Search, who's also in our little networking group. Boyd is the head of the Georgia Society, and a lot of people consider accounting to be boring, and it's not. But it gives you a great background to be able to look at any business and look at their financial statements, figure out how they make money, and you can really replicate that in any business. So it's just a solid foundation.
So I have to confess, I peeked at your website and saw too many 5-star reviews to count. Words like efficient, professional, courteous, quick, and resourceful were used in those reviews. How have you and your team built that reputation in the marketplace?
It's been over a long period of time, I will say that. Process, basically asking the right questions, listening to our customers, and having a repeatable process in how we dispatch and staff the jobs, making sure we have the right people on the jobs. We've got guys that have different skill sets and could be like a grand piano. Not every one of my guys can handle a grand piano. So we got to make sure if we're going to go out and do that, we got a guy who knows how to take the legs off and put it on a piano board and pad it up and make sure it's protected before we move it. That's a lot of it is crew selection. And I always try to, if I get a referral, and I get a lot of referrals myself, I always handle them starting with me on the phone, get an idea of what's going on, and then make sure that starting out, I assign it to the right moving consultant. We don't call them salespeople. We call them moving consultants because that's really what they are. And make sure there's a good match there with our consultant and that customer, and then make sure we gather the correct information, that we don't come out there, we're not surprised and get out there and find out, oh, you got a pool table. You didn't tell there was a pool table, because that requires a little bit of extra work on a pool table. You got to take it apart. And
yeah, those are heavy.
Yeah, just making sure we've got all the information before we arrive, and that we're adhering to the Boy Scout motto of be prepared, that we've got the right guys, we've got the right tools, and they know what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking today with Erik Christensen with Bulldog Movers. Bulldog Movers is an independent moving, storage, and logistics company. Through its 5 operating entities, Bulldog provides the most comprehensive solutions in the moving and storage industry. Erik, I know you do residential moves, you do commercial moves. Is one more difficult than the other? And then as a follow-up to that, what are some of the biggest challenges you face on a regular basis?
Residential and commercial, and similarities between them, we're picking up used furniture in most cases, and we're moving it from one place to another. But commercial moves tend to be after hours at night. And Danny works for Cresa, so they know that buildings have a lot of rules. And one of the rules on a Class A building is you're not allowed in there until after 5. So those require a lot of planning to make sure that we've got things set up before we get there, and that we're prepared with our dollies and we can get in and out of there, because we don't want to be there past midnight. We really don't want to be past there at 11 p.m. Bad things happen after midnight, both professionally and personally. That's part of the issue. But residential and commercial go both great business. We also do logistics. So we do a lot of receiving, inspection, warehousing, delivery, installation. We have a fine arts group that we do work at the museums here in town. We're TSA certified, so we can crate and package things to go directly onto a passenger aircraft. So tons and tons of stuff that we do that most moving companies don't do. And those are what I call special services: deinstalling, reinstalling appliances, lighting in some cases, new furniture. We work a lot with decorators and designers and doing their installations. That's a big piece of our business through a company called Classic Design Services and CV Fine Arts. But like I said, it's all good business. And commercial, residential, we don't care, other than on commercial, you can be out late.
Yeah.
I hate being out late on a residential job, but we try to book our jobs to be completed in 7 hours or less. And that way, if maybe the customer's not as prepared as they thought they were going to be when we get there, if If we end up going 9, it's okay. What we don't want to do is we don't want to be out there 12 hours. We want to get in and we want to get the job done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Greg Jordan, who was one of the original owners at Bulldog, said there's 2 ways to screw up a move. He said you can either overstaff it or understaff it, and both of those are going to cost the customer additional money. So we try to right staff the job and make sure we've got the right number of people out there to get the job done in a reasonable period of time.
Yeah. So you've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years. What are some of the lessons that you've learned that you could share with our listeners?
Boy, there's so many. Some people say never make the same mistake twice. I can tell you, I guarantee you I've made the same mistake more than once and twice in a lot of cases. But yeah. I'd say diversification of revenue. To me, that's the most important thing that you can do if you own a business, is try to figure out how to broaden that business to be able to sell additional products and services that are ancillary to that business. And I think that's a huge piece. And that way, if you run into problems economically, say we have a recession or a downturn in the economy, you've got more than one revenue source to rely on.
Yeah.
You're not dependent upon just one single thing. And for us, storage is a huge component of what we do. We do commercial, we do residential, we do crating, we do all different types of things, all related to moving and storage, but broader than most people do.
We're talking today with Erik Christensen with Bulldog Movers. As Erik mentioned, he was previously a CPA. He's also served as past president of the Georgia Movers Association and has also served on numerous nonprofit and community boards. Erik, you and I have been part of the Atlanta Executive Forum, I believe, for about 18 years now. How important have groups either like this or Vistage been in seeking business advice on a variety of issues?
I think they're great forums for business advice because you've got confidentiality. You've got a bunch of experienced guys that have been through the trenches and have done a lot of the same types of deals or made the same types of mistakes. And you end up getting good advice when you step back and it's somebody else. I think it's easier to make a good decision when you're advising somebody else rather maybe than when you're doing it yourself. And I think that that's invaluable, no matter what type of decision. It could be acquisition, it could be an employment issue where you're trying to get rid of somebody that isn't really contributing to the team. All these things, everybody's got their own stories to tell. And the best part about it is people having different experiences from you that relate to the issue that you're bringing up. So the groups have been great, and I've been involved in a bunch of them, and it's one of the ways you can give back. When young people come into my office, and a lot of times they come in unannounced, they just show up, they're trying to sell something. And I do like to spend time with the young people that come in, and maybe I don't need anything from them. I might not have them, but I try to give them advice and say, if you're here and you're in the community, you need to be in a community group. You should be in 3 groups. All good things come in 3. So you should be in a community group. You should be in your industry group, whatever that is, some type of industry or trade group. And you should be in a faith-based group. Pick one of those, and that's going to be your network. And the people that you get to know from those groups are going to be your foundation here in the community. And if you're in a community, family, local business, it's great. It gets to be more difficult if you're with Deloitte and you're on the road, which I was for 5 years, or with Arthur Andersen and you're on the road. It's really hard to integrate yourself in with the community.
Yeah.
Because you're gone all the time. But if you're here, get involved, whatever it is, whatever floats your boat, whatever you're interested in, get involved in that. And that's going to build your network. Yeah. Building your network is important.
Yeah, that's great advice. We've got the end of the school year coming. Summer usually, hopefully, spikes up in moves. If we have any listeners that are thinking about a commercial or a residential move, what's the best way for them to get either in touch with you or in touch with Bulldog Movers?
You can always call me on my cell, 770-318-3772. And I would certainly love to spend time with you. And if it's only consulting on your move, and I might tell you to go call the van line or do it a different way and not use us, I'm happy to do that. You can also send me an email at eric@bulldogmovers.com, ERIK, not ERIC, ERIK at bulldogmovers.com. Sell is best. Sometimes I fall behind on email. I'm getting 500 or 600 a day, and it's hard to filter through. I've put a lot of filters in place, but I still got to look at a lot of stuff. So if you need me quick, call me.
Yeah. Erik, thanks for coming on today. Great words of wisdom.
Thank you, Bill.
Danny, so excited to have you on the show today. Danny's with Cresa Partners. By the way, congratulations on your recent promotion to Senior Vice President.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
How did you and Cresa find each other? What's that story?
It's a good story. And it's funny because part of it has to do with my background as a CPA. And I don't think before coming here today, I knew our other guests had an appreciation for accounting.
Yeah, how about that?
It's his friendly confines in this room.
And then you got two bankers, one former banker.
One of them which writes for the Georgia Society of CPAs.
Yeah. Numbers nerds.
Numbers nerds. We're all just a bunch of numbers nerds in here. I started at Deloitte as well, Erik, and right after college, I was in our audit practice for about 5 years, and I left, and I went into industry, and I found myself in a pseudo CFO role, where I elevated from that role and I was a business director as well. And this business was growing and we needed to make a decision. Are we going to scale this business or are we going to sell it? And we decided to sell it. And when we sold it, we had properties and assets that we wanted to sell with it. And so to help us out, we had hired and engaged a counterpart to what I do to help us list it and market it and then ultimately put together a deal. And when we got to the end of that process, I remember seeing what we paid the person in the firm, and I thought, you got to be kidding me. Because in the role that I was in, I said, I feel like we deserved a lot more advocacy for that. I feel like we deserved a little bit more advice and a little bit more nurturing walking through that process. It was a situation where nothing happened, but then when something happened, somebody was ready to get their check. And if anybody's listening to this, nodding their heads, and you know exactly how I felt. You can appreciate that. So I took a minute and I explored commercial real estate, and I said, what part and what void can I fill in commercial real estate? Because I loved the transaction of selling the business that I was a part of, and it was a lot of fun putting it together. And commercial real estate transaction is very similar. No deal is the same. And when I looked at the different functions, like property management, capital markets, structuring debt on different assets, landlord representation, and then ultimately tenant representation, which is what I do, I said, that's where I want to be. I want to help businesses, and I want to provide what I believed I deserved. And it was 100% advocacy towards the transaction and the decision that was trying to be made. And how I found Cresa was my background as a CPA. If you know what that's like to be a CPA, or if you appreciate the CPA world, you know that we have guidance hammered down us year in and year out, and independence rules are a real thing. And they exist for a reason. And Cresa believes that no firm can serve both sides of any transaction. And so we represent 100% of the interest of businesses and organizations that need and use real estate for business purposes. What we do a lot of is the hand-holding that I believe that we should have been entitled to when we sold that building. And what we don't do is play ball on the other side of the fence, where we help build value in these assets and we help create shareholder interest in these assets, and we try to make money off of these assets. We're building agnostic, and all we do is we dedicate 100% of everything we do to the needs of a tenant. So that's how, long-winded story of how I decided that I wanted to be here at Cresa.
And it's been fascinating because I've certainly followed Cresa through the years, and having tenant representation 15 years ago to me was a totally new concept, because I think many business owners feel like they need to figure out their lease agreement on their own, and what might be a nothing comment to a potential tenant has a big difference in the transaction. And so it's just fascinated me that someone can have an advocate on their side of the table to take care of their interests versus the landlord, because the landlord's not there to help the tenant. They are by providing space, but it is a money-making proposition for them.
Their interests are pretty straightforward. You as a tenant are valuable to their asset. And they want you to live, and they want you to exist, and they want you to pay rent. But they don't necessarily want you to pay as little as possible for it. And they don't necessarily want to give you the most flexibility in your lease agreement. And I'll also add too, what's interesting, before I got into this business, I didn't realize was that so much of this function and this role that exists of a tenant rep was largely invented and innovated by Roger Staubach, of all people, which is really interesting. And I had no idea about that before I got into doing what I do now.
Yeah.
But I find it fascinating. It is back when he was a quarterback, an MVP, Super Bowl winning quarterback, even that wasn't enough money or income for him as a football player back when he was playing. So real estate was a side hustle for him. And after football ended, he invented what was known as the Staubach Company.
Yeah.
And that started a lot of and everybody knows a lot of as a tenant rep right now.
Maybe his left tackle, which covered his blind side, was his, quote, tenant rep for when he was quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Watching out for his rear end.
So what's the state of the real estate leasing market right now? Is it tend to favor landlords? Does it tend to favor tenants right now? And why?
That's a great question. And it's always changing. And a lot of it's changed just in the last 4 years because of COVID. What I will say before answering all of that is that most of what you usually read is written from a landlord's perspective. So when we hear and we see headlines about the office market and the sky is falling and properties aren't seeing the tenants in there as much as often, that's good news for our office tenants. That's good news for the companies that we help. And the other side of that, and this is the other niche that Cresa participates in, is industrial real estate. When you hear that industrial real estate's booming and industrial real estate's doing so well and the market is fire, it's talking about landlords of industrial properties and how well they're doing. So over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been a tale of two different markets. You've got what you read in an office and you've got what you read and see in industrial. And what you read and see is pretty accurate. Now, what's not accurate is that not all landlords are going bankrupt with their office buildings. That's not the case, but vacancies are high and subleases are high too. Vacancies right now in the entire Atlanta market for office are at about 15%, which doesn't sound that high, but that's not including subleases. The last time that it approached anywhere near that was when we were recovering from the last recession in 2011. So there's a lot of vacancy out there and there's a lot of subleases. There's probably 9 million square feet in Atlanta of total subleases right now. And put that into context, in a normal market pre-COVID, it was probably 2.5 million. So there's a lot of sublease property available right now and sublease office available right now. In industrial, right now, it's cooled down a little bit. Vacancies a couple of years ago were as low as 3% in Atlanta, and that was close to the national average too. And in a normal market pre-COVID, it was probably closer to 8 or 9%. Right now, Atlanta's industrial market, we're at about a 7% vacancy. So it's stabilizing a little bit, but it's going to be impacted. It already is impacted in a few ways just by what's going on in the credit markets right now.
We're talking today with Danny Vander Maten. One of the things that Danny does is really helps the best companies navigate their real estate strategy. And on that topic, Danny, I've heard it said that business owners need to fit the real estate to their business strategy, not make the strategy fit the real estate. Is that true? And if so, why?
100% true. Yeah, the businesses that we help and the companies that we help, where we like to lead, where I like to lead, is really understanding the business by asking the simple Warren Buffett questions. How do you make money? What's important to that goal? How many employees do you have? And that's asking, who are you responsible for? Because at the end of the day, if the real estate's not of value to the profitability or even the goals of the organization, it won't do any good. And it's a point we like to drive home because our company is really only concerned about the companies that occupy these spaces, but also holistically and fundamentally, those should be the principles that guide the decision. How is this going to make you more money? And it's different for office and industrial users, the two specialties that we serve. In the industrial space, in a lot of instances, that asset really is a tool. It functions as a facility to operate, either to produce, take goods and services, to take goods and product and to redistribute them, or just to house things. And office is a little different, but in a lot of ways similar too. That's where the heart of the company beats for a lot of companies. Now, it's not the same for every organization, but to answer your question, that is true. The tail that wags the dog should not be real estate. It should be the other way around.
Now, I'm a big believer in Cresa and what they do, but I don't want our audience to take my word for it. Why should a business owner use you and Cresa for their leasing needs?
Fundamentally, to borrow the piano analogy, you want to make sure that when you're doing something as massive as maybe even considering a relocation or restructuring a multi-million-dollar obligation, that you know how to move a piano. I wouldn't trust myself and two of my strongest buddies to pick up a baby grand if they had never done it before. I just wouldn't do it. So when you're considering or reconsidering or evaluating what your real estate needs are, you're owed and you deserve the best level of advocacy to help you make that decision and to build as much context around it so that, going back to what we were talking about earlier, we can match the strategy of the business goals to this obligation. Because the reality of it is nobody plans their business growth according to the life of a lease. It's the challenge. It's why we have jobs. It's why we do what we do. Because nobody says, all right, I'm going to sign this 5-year lease and I'm going to wait to grow when I get to that 4-year mark. So it's just in time for my renewal. Nobody thinks this way. So I would say holistically, people should use Cresa or an advocate when they're coming to move that big piano, because you don't know what you don't know. And beyond that, why I would say Cresa would be a lot of why I was talking about my background as an accountant and having zero conflict in the transaction, having no landlord interests. We are agnostic to the interests of landlords whatsoever, and we can focus all of our efforts on helping the companies that need real estate. And going beyond that, as a company, everything we earn and everything that's developed on our platform, it's reinvested into those services and reinvested into those practices to help tenants, because everything on our platform exists only to help tenants. A lot of companies that might be bigger than what we do because they have a lot of different types of services that conflict with the interest of tenants can't say that, because they're always trying to build out and diversify what they earn into all of those different practices and specialties. And at the end of the day, everything we do and everything that exists on our platform is only for the needs of tenants.
So I do want to comment. You started a podcast recently on Business Radio X, Executive Perspective. Talk about your show a little bit.
I have you to thank for part of that and being such a good counsel for me when I was trying to make that decision. So thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So Executive Perspective, it really exists as a way for us to provide a good opportunity for the individuals and the leaders of the organizations that we work with to tell stories and to share their business insights. Because what happens so often for the Erik Christensens of the world, you've got so many great stories and so much perspective and advice worth sharing. And sometimes the questions aren't always asked. And sometimes, the opportunity to share that, it doesn't always present itself. So we as an office said, you know what, let's pick the brains of the individuals who hire us and let's sit down with them and give them an opportunity to just share their wisdom. An example of a story that was really unique on our podcast was there was a company that was centered around paying employees on cruise ships. And the CEO came on Executive Perspective and told the story of what it was like going through COVID. And what I thought was awesome about that was when we went through COVID, we all remember there were so many businesses that were deemed necessary, but the one that was deemed unnecessary was the Love Boat. Cruises were not running. Nobody was letting them run. And Larry Hipp, the CEO that came on and told that story, told us from beginning to end what it was like hearing about the shutdown from a Donald Trump tweet, of all things, through the following year and a half, where they took all of the energy to preserve the stability of the company, but also find ways to reinvest in other products that could be useful to the customers that they were already serving who were having their own problems. So that's just a little microcosm of what that show's about. I appreciate you asking. I love doing it. And I think you do such a good job here on Profit Sense too. I really admire this. And you bring in such great people and a great cast and do such a good job with this.
Yeah, thank you for that. And please, for our listeners, give a shout out for the show page. If they want to come and listen to some of the folks, what's the best way for them to listen to Executive Perspective?
Type in Executive Perspective into the old Google machine and my name along with it, Danny Vander Maten. And you can find it and download it on Apple Podcasts, Business Radio X. and I believe Amazon.
Yeah, that's excellent. And for those who are looking for tenant representation, Danny, share with them the best way to get in touch with you.
You contact me by email or phone. Email's a little long. I wish my last name was as simple as King. It would be a lot easier. But it's D Vander Maten, VANDERMATEN at CRESA.com, or by phone, 404-989-6618.
Yeah, Danny, it's been great having you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Bill, thank you so much. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Bob.
I want to talk a minute about the X factor in leadership. In Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, he calls the X factor of great leadership is a paradoxical blend of extreme personal humility and professional will. I had lunch recently with someone I would consider as having the X factor of leadership. He took on a CEO position about 6 years ago, had inherited an old school management philosophy with little resources invested in the professional development, business development, and collaboration of his team members. He's somewhat quiet and reserved, but very ambitious. In his time as CEO thus far, he's contributed significantly to the business and professional development of his coworkers. He's changed the culture to one of collaboration, not only with coworkers, but clients as well. His energy is focused outwardly to create an organization of thriving coworkers determined to make their organization the best it can be, and invest their time volunteering in the communities they serve. Here are some key characteristics of top leaders according to Collins. Personal humility. These leaders are modest and unassuming and don't seek out the limelight or public recognition. They're focused on building and sustaining a great organization. Professional will. These leaders have a fierce determination to succeed. They're willing to do whatever it takes to make their companies great, even if it means making tough decisions or sacrificing their own personal interests. Ambition for the cause. These leaders are motivated by a larger purpose than their own personal success. They're passionate about their work and want to make a difference in the world. With these leaders, their ambition is first for the cause, for the organization and its purpose, not themselves. Their energy is channeled outward, not inward. If you want to be a great leader, these are some good places to start. If you want to keep up with the latest in pro business news, follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at The Profitability Coach. If you want to listen to past or future Profit Sense episodes, you can find us on ProfitSenseRadio.com. This is Profit Sense with Bill McDermott signing off. Make it a great day.